Editing's good. It would be a shame not to use the magic of editing, wouldn't it?
You could like put sunglasses on, like just on and off, so that you know when you're like you're intercutting it, it'll just like be like what? One of the framing things of the show was you know, two quite different approaches to painting, which both kind of like walk the line between irony and sincerity.
That's right.
You know, we're sitting in your studio today, and I'm really getting a nice chance of looking around some work, which has a lot of relation to what's on display at Sour Grapes at the moment.
Yes, it's directly following up from that work.
You know, a series of these like nature motifs. These compositions that sort of, to my mind, dance the line a little bit between abstraction and representation, kind of leaning, obviously, like much more on the representation side, but there's a sort of a strong relation to, actually, almost like the kind of like the all-over compositions of Jackson Pollock, even.
Sure.
I'm wondering, like, I just want to kind of like jump back into the rods as part of that. You have like a variety of like painterly approaches in these paintings. You know, you have this like very loose kind of washy ground that everything is built up off. The orbs are becoming like increasingly dimensional. Like you really
I'm getting better at them. Practicing.
They're really sort of pushing into like a high level of representation, but like somewhere in the middle you have the leaves. Like the painterly procedure is like, it's legible to me, right? Like it lands in the like the language of like of almost like cartoon.
Yeah.
But the rods are really weird.
Yeah.
I find them like they really kind of like push out and push back, because you're using this like a series of shorthands for creating the volume of them, but then you completely undo that by leaving the ends, you know, like blank. Like the rods don't tell me whether they're hollow or solid.
Yeah, I feel like the rods are weird as well.
Very weird.
They're kind of like, they're sort of weirdly anonymous things. Do you remember like, I used to read this magazine in the 80s called The Unexplained or something, and it was sort of about conspiracy theories, I guess. Right. But there was this one idea about the world was filled with these transparent plastic rods that flew around. Do you remember that idea? It was really intriguing. There was just like, so there's always these transparent rods which travel around the atmosphere. Like they have information in them, they're a way of sharing information, and they're also like sort of portals into other times or spaces and stuff like that. Wow. So I have this sort of, you know, within the logic of the painting, there's these kind of ideas that I entertain while I'm making them, like, oh, perhaps these rods are performing this function, you know, within the work. Whether that sort of translates to the viewer or not, like, I don't really know, but that's just another way for me to like sort of keep an engagement in the work and think about something interesting that might be happening. Because I also like the idea that the works are sort of thinking about where they are in time. They can't really escape their position in like a geological scale as far as our time in the Anthropocene goes. So that's kind of where they are. But I'm hoping that they sort of get to look back on recent art histories as well and sort of make a juxtaposition between that and deep time. So if we think about stuff like that, then the Renaissance is a fairly recent thing. You know, so is Cubism, so is like all the sort of the myriad things that happened in modernism, with painting, with music, with all that stuff that I'm interested in, you know, with cartoons. So I'm kind of wanting the paintings to sort of somehow bring those things together or look at those things from where we are now. Maybe that sounds a bit lofty or so, I don't know, but it's just like, I feel like that's a possibility, you know?
And like, I just like return back to this like unending puzzlement that I have with because I just can't like decide whether they're hollow or solid, and
Yeah.
and I think like also just like, you know, I'm looking at a couple of these works just off camera here at the moment, and like they sit so emphatically against the sort of like the painterly mastery, which is also at play. Like, you know, you can render anything that you want,
Yeah.
and these rods are, you know, so like aggressively non-masterful.
Comes back to what you mentioned about the play between sincerity and cynicism or irony that I feel like is present in both of the works. That's kind of reflected in the way that the works are painted, where there's, you know, I'm trying to do something realistic, and then I'm taking an easier route and doing something much more simplistic, where I know if I paint 3 lines of a different gradient together, it's kind of going to make an illusion. Or if I put an object behind another object, that's kind of going to create some depth.
Yep.
So that kind of reflects, I guess, sort of like a cheap trick, you know, but then that's played up against something where there's sort of some virtuosity happening. I'm trying to make.
I can sort of almost see that like there's a Pinocchio's nose kind of metaphor.
Pinocchio's nose, oh my God. The wooden nose.
Pinocchian? Can you make that into a Pinocchian? I don't know. But, you know, there's something in that about, you know, like truths and lies. And
For sure.
And the sort of like the cheeky middle ground.
Yeah, for sure. What's a cheap trick and what's sincere? You know, there's. I feel like we're both kind of there. Like, what's happening when we look at our work side by side? Like, on the surface, there's these similarities because we both have lines and we both have circles and we both have wood grain. And there's this kind of quite apparent idea of sort of an ersatz nature, or kind of a Disneyfication of nature that's apparent in both of the works. So there's this, in the show Sour Grapes, there's this really, really nice, the facade of the works talk to each other.
Yeah.
But there's also ideas in there that are similar. They're not the same. There is something happening beyond the facade of the works that talks to each other in the works.
Do you think of your work as being anxious? Is there an anxiety in it?
Like, there definitely is, because I'm quite a anxious person. Aside from being like chill, there's definitely some anxiety in the works. Some of the works feel quite paranoid to me. Sort of the ones with eyes, things hiding behind the trees. So there's sort of a paranoia and anxiety in some of them, mixed with a celebration and a dance as well, which is happening. So I guess in that way they could simply be a self-portrait, where they could sort of reflect an idiosyncratic personality. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because it feels like there's a sort of a flip-flop between, as you say, the sort of like the surveillance of the eyes in the work, the sort of slight sense of paranoia, and then there's almost like, I mean, it's a bit reductive, but, you know, the grapes refer so much to like the bacchanal, and there's these two worlds of panic on the one hand and kind of almost like sort of like a louche celebration or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we're supposed to be panicking, aren't we?
We sure are.
We're supposed to be in a state of panic. We should be.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you though, like looking back to like the procedure of painting and the activity of painting, we both sort of like roughly kind of fall into a generation of like people who went through like the early stages of like an art practice. And did you go to school for art?
Yeah, I went to art school.
You know, one of those like those enduring questions of like you know, sort of like mid-aughts, you know, art education was like, is painting, you know, it was so obvious that painting wasn't dead, and that was a kind of a you know, an almost like irrelevant question. But the the discomfort, I think, particularly like a lot of like art educators had around painting.
Yeah.
You know, like does that sort of thread through? Like, was that part of your arc? Was that like painting itself was like not a viable thing to do, and that you had to find your way to it, or?
Like, I guess so. It just ended up being painting. Like, I really like the arguments around painting being dead. It was kind of exciting. But like, the more you hear that, it's just like, well, everywhere I go, I'm seeing paintings on the wall anyway. Yeah. So, you know, and yeah, it has just, I've done sculpture, and it's just always ended up coming back to 2D and illustration and making paintings, I guess. How do you feel like about painting in those terms? Like, did you ever think, oh, I should make some video art? Like, because all I see is the TV, you know?
Yeah.
Like, when I see video art, the first thing I look at is what the props are, what the structure of it is, what brand of TV I'm looking at.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I see. Whereas with painting, I don't really see the canvas, I just sort of see the art. So I guess that's why I'm able to sort of stay interested in it, because I don't feel the restrictions of the material of painting. It's just, okay, that's how I make it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I like the honesty of painting. It's not a mediated thing. You know, you it's a lumpen activity. You stagger into the studio with your brain half hanging out of your head, and you pick up a paintbrush, and then slowly things click into gear, and a couple of hours later you're going for it.
I feel like it's a good way to maintain an engagement.
Yeah.
And that's another similar thread, is that we're actually making kind of analog work, which is sort of easy to forget. Especially when I look at your work, you know, especially with the stripe ones, they're so well made, and you know, you don't really see the hand straight away, but it really is there.
Yeah. I mean, I have such a deep engagement with painting, but such discomfort around some of the things that come with it. There's a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
Such a nutritious activity, but it also just seems like so kind of, I mean, like trite in a way. Like, it's sort of embarrassing to.
I know.
Like,
I feel the baggage is helpful. The baggage gives it like context. It's like you sort of have all this meaning built into it already without kind of having to do anything. I like that about it.
I sometimes I'm just like, oh my god, you know, like the practice of painting sort of just, it comes with like a beret and some sort of like sword fighting with the canvas, and it's pretty hilarious. But I think that's one of the things that, like, why I like walk back from having my hand in the work a lot of the time. There are moments where I can kind of like let schmutz and shit hit the canvas, but a lot of the time I'm really also trying to walk back from from that sort of like gloppy, gobby painting to have something where it's not obviously me in the work, that like, at least in some respect somebody else could make it. Yeah, I mean, it's just an enduring interest for me, and I feel so much sort of push and pull towards the process of painting and the activity of it, like the performativity of it, that it's it's so informed by all of this sort of the good and bad behavior of all of these other people that made it before. It's sort of I'm getting a little bit kind of obtuse here, but the interest and the kind of thing that I find a bit boring about painting is it's so much about the painter as well. I've never made video, but I kind of love the idea that video is something of even if you are the ultimate maker of it, it's fundamentally collaborative, because you're working with an editor and it's somebody who's operating a camera.
Well, I guess we get to collaborate in these conversations. Like, how do you feel like your work can move beyond its signature? Like, there's a signature in the work. You can, like you say, it's hard for painting to not be about the painter, but do you feel like the work can move beyond that kind of via the visual clues or the visual cues that you're setting up for people? Like, stuff that is familiar in the work that makes people not think about you making it, but think about their experience in the world. I think that's what happens when I look at your work anyway.
Well, that's like the perpetual ambition is to have something that is sort of like universal, right?
Yeah.
Like whether or not it works, you want to make something that kind of like transcends authorship, or it's an image that kind of endures. But
Yeah.
it's a puzzling one for me. I'm not sure that I've ever felt like I've got it.
Yeah. And do you need to transcend authorship? Like, I don't know if you do. I've been told so many times that it's bad, and I hear a lot of people talking about ego as being a bad thing, and I'm just like, well, isn't that just a necessary part of being alive, having some form of ego, and doesn't that help you sort of make something? Like,
well, I mean, and especially as an artist, like, what are you ultimately except like a complete egoist?
Yeah. Like if I hear people say, okay, this work's got no ego in it, it's always, why is it always so passive aggressive in reality? You know what I mean? It's just like, no, I don't buy that at all. There's nothing wrong with having an ego. That's how you sort of do something,
Yeah. And we sit in these spaces by ourselves, kind of grinding it out. Like that ultimately is this sort of like, if you think about painters generally, it's like painter does not play well with others. It's a solitary endeavor for a reason. We'd like to kind of dive into our egos.
I know. I was telling my sister Emma the other day how much time I spend how long it takes to make the work, and she was like, "Oh, you old school painter guy," and I was like, "Yeah, I guess so, but like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what's the other option if I'm not sitting in a studio making work as an artist? What are you really doing? Are you bossing people around via email, sitting in a Starbucks? Like, I don't want to do that." It's like...
it's a great way to fill time.
Yeah, I mean, I can just get shit done on my computer by, like, emailing people. It's like, well, I have to do some of that, but I don't want to spend all my time being an email tyrant,
This particular show happened in a way fairly quickly. It was about a year ago that we started all talking about it.
Yeah.
But I was in the process of relocating back from New York to Wellington, and so the actual making of the show was intense and fairly quick. I'm really kind of like showing two very interrelated bodies of work. There's a very large painting and two other paintings, one which is medium large and one which is quite small.
Yeah.
And those paintings were all made in the 3 months prior to the
I love the way the smaller work talks to older work that I've seen, and it's just like, it's small, but it's just a real nugget, and it sort of gives what you've done like all this depth of time, and also depth of just sort of shifts the scale, having that small work quite close to the medium-sized work. I really like what happens there.
It's really awesome. Like that juxtaposition of large and small, kind of like misshaped diptychs is something that I've found really interesting and nutritious for a long time. Yeah, it
reminds me of who was it? The guy on the Muppets who does the near and far thing. He's like near. I think it's Grover. He goes near, and he runs towards the camera, and then he goes and he goes far. It's so effective.
So all of those paintings were happening fairly quickly. The sculptures are from about a year prior, and they had a longer genesis, but the sculptures roll within the work. Both of these things were. I was making different paintings, but very similar different paintings to the ones that are in the exhibition at the same time.
Yeah.
And, in a way, the sculptures are. They're built in quite low relief, and I really think about them as having a very strong relationship the paintings in the sense of the paintings.
Absolutely.
And, finely stacked layers.
I love the way there's a lot to talk about with the sculptures, and I really like the way they talk to this idea that painters should not make sculpture.
Yeah.
Do you see them as working like that?
Yeah, I mean, like in a way they're like painting in the round.
Yeah.
But not in the very round. They're still pretty
Yeah.
flat. I mean,
they're very much sculptures by a painter.
Yeah.
They are, like, you can see the concerns are kind of painterly in these sculptures, and I like the way they talk to that, and I think they look really cool.
I mean, that kind of like layering of objects and space has been like the enduring question in my painting, like literally forever. It's this sort of like negotiation of depth and atmosphere, and it like plays out in the abstract work, which has been a strong part of the practice for a long time, but also in some of this more representational painting. Like the thing that was really, really great about Sour Grapes was, provided the impetus to really kind of push out the scale of work that I've been doing on a large scale, but not on quite on the epic scale.
Well, it's really nice to see these. It's nice to see these ideas materialize, and I like the way that the sculptures also talk to the stands that you made for the large painting. The sort of these steel structures which are supporting the large painting, and then are the core of the sculptures.
Looping back to the idea of painting with a big question mark. The sort of like my.
Is it okay to be painting?
Is it okay to be a painter? And what even is a painting? Blah 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 blah. These big things that you spend too much time thinking about when you're in the studio and making it. Procedure of putting paintings on stands for me is I think it's sort of like it presses against the potential of painting to just kind of like disappear into the wall. I want the canvas itself to be part of like the art experience. I want this idea that you can actually walk around a painting and you can see the back of it, and you can.
Why is a painting not a sculpture anyway? I mean,
ultimately it is, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Even on a kind of like a granular, like microscopic level, each layer of paint is sculptural in its addition.
Yeah.
So that's really what the ambition of the sculptures is to stack and stagger layers and produce something that's in the round.
There was a lot. It was a really busy time in the studio. All the works were made in 2022, and just a lot happened. It was really good to be able to be making these works at the same time knowing people are going to see these. More people than my Instagram or Facebook friends are going to see these. So that was a nice thing to happen. And I only had so much time and resources that it was just sort of, there was no room to make any mistakes with these works. It was just like all of these works have to kind of work in some way. So that was kind of what ended up happening.